When I was somewhere in my early 20s, I broke my arm. I was sparring in kickboxing, and I tried to do I did a spinning back fist, hit it on my cousin's elbow, cousin Neil, broke this bone with what's called a nightstick fracture. The doctor told me it's called a nightstick fracture because apparently back in the day, it was common for this is what the doctor told me. It was common for cops when they would like beat drunks or whatever. They would hold up their arm to stop the club, and it would break their arm. This was like early America. This is what the doctor told me. I don't know. He said so. They call it a nightstick fracture. It's kind of like informal jargon for the break that I had. It was actually on my right arm. But anyway, it was the first time I broke a major bone. Everybody told me if you break a major bone, you would be in so much pain you wouldn't be able to function. Well, I was able to function, so I did. I just continued functioning. As I figured, well, it can't actually be broken. Everybody's telling me like I'll be laying on the ground, writhing in pain, but it hurt like hell. But it was like, well, it doesn't hurt that bad. So I keep going through it. About 3 days later, at the time I was cooking, I was working in a restaurant. And while I was working, the arm, I don't know why it decided at that moment to just blow up. And it was like a balloon. And yeah, my arm was broken. So I go to the doctor. The doctor said, yeah, your arm's broken, dude. What's my point? My point is that it was 3 days of pain, and I couldn't quite use my arm. And then once I got the cast on, I couldn't work for a little while, and I didn't have a lot of money then, so that was not good. I also couldn't train, and I was very serious about my training then. So, what is my point? Now, as I look back on it, it's just a funny story, right? I mean, it was 3 days of pain and a couple months of serious disruptions to my life, serious financial disruptions. But in hindsight, it was just a funny story. It's really not a big deal. Well, the thought I've had is that if something in the human being persists beyond this biological life, and what I mean is a heaven, reincarnation, any of those other options, and I know that some of you out there have very firm beliefs about that, and I respect that. I'm a pilgrim. I don't claim to be anything but a pilgrim. I do not have definitive answers. I'm a seeker. I'm a pilgrim, and I'm just looking. So, but I often ask myself the questions that everybody asks themselves, such as, if there is a benevolent creator, why would they allow suffering, and why would they allow so much suffering in our lives? And I just started to think that from the perspective of eternity, right, everything would be like my broken arm, including death. I mean, it sounds weird, but think if you're in heaven, or if you're in reincarnation and you're 10 lifetimes later, and you're in heaven for 1,000 years, and you look back, your death wouldn't even be a big deal. It would be just like my broken arm. It would be like, oh yeah, I was twisted up in this flaming wreckage of a car, and a screaming, blinding pain, and then I died. And it wouldn't even be that big of a deal, but even beyond that, it's also like, when you're raising a child, you're helping rear a child, there are times when you have to say, sorry, son, you need to suck this up and deal with this, and you're just going to have to sweat this out because you need to learn a good work ethic, and that good work ethic is going to pay dividends down the road. And in that moment, the child is miserable, hates you, and is in physical pain, maybe, from exertion or whatever. But later on, they will remember that only fondly because it did indeed make them a better person. Well, presumably, if there is something in us that persists throughout eternity, or even just a much longer time scale, then everything would look that way, including the things that hurt us the most, and including the most horrible times in human history. In hindsight, it would be like, well, that had to happen. I mean, it was just one of those things. It wasn't that big of a deal, and maybe it taught me this lesson, And if you think of perhaps if there is a creator, whatever the creator's role isn't to make us fat, comfortable, and happy. Maybe the Creator's perspective is to give us the opportunity to rear us and hone us into being people of character, which means having to overcome trials and having to overcome difficulties. And as crazy as it sounds, over the scale of eternity, that would mean that even things that seem extremely brutal, in hindsight, 1,000 years looking at it from 1,000 years in the future, wouldn't be that big of a deal, right? And so it just seems like a lot of the things that we take to be inexplicable suffering, they appear that way only if you look at it from within the perspective of the scale of time of our human lifetimes, of our biological lifetimes. But they wouldn't apply if you're looking at it from the scale of eternity. It's a completely different perspective. And if that is true, then it is totally feasible that you could have a loving and benevolent God, benevolent Creator, who allows suffering and maybe even intentionally induces suffering. Just like the father who makes their son or daughter work hard in order to teach them a work ethic because they know it will benefit them later in life. I'm aware it's a weird thought, but it actually makes sense. Like it makes sense to look at things, in my opinion, from the perspective of eternity, if we are considering the possibility that our lives do extend for eternity, or at least a very long time. So anyway, I don't know. It's just a thought I had. I'm not saying this is how I think it is. As I always try to make clear, I'm just a pilgrim. I'm sharing my thoughts, and I would love to hear other people's thoughts. And yeah, that's all. Just a pilgrim, man. Got no answers. Just asking questions and sharing ideas. And finding that some people out there will actually sit down and listen to my thoughts, which is sincerely an incredible honor, and it's just a lot of fun, and I dig it and I appreciate it. And thank you very much, everybody. I hope you're all having great days. Goodbye.